that killing is not simply slaughter. At any rate, it's a ritual act. It's a recognition of your dependency and of the voluntary giving of this food to you by the animal who has given it. It's a beautiful thing. It turns life into a mythological experience.
The hunt becomes what?
It becomes a ritual. Mm-hmm. The hunt is a ritual.
Expressing a hope of resurrection, that the animal was food and you needed the animal to return.
And some kind of respect for the animal that was killed. That's the thing that gets me all the time in this hunting ceremonial system.
Respect for the animal.
Respect for the animal, and more than respect. I mean, that animal becomes a messenger of divine power, you see.
And you wind up, as the hunter, killing the messenger.
Killing the god.
So this video is not about eating in movies. I mean, it sort of is, but most specifically, it's about the sort of magic that happens on screen when a few things come together all at once. In mythology, those that devour are usually cast in a not-so-good light. They're soul eaters, witches, demons, or vengeful gods. Not only is the act of devouring protecting the devourer, it also makes them more powerful. There's an instance in Norse mythology where souls are devoured by birds and carried to hell, where she makes them young again so that they may be reborn into the world. The act of devouring is often reserved for the villain.
Oh, yummy. Someone I need to eat.
Whereas being devoured is often a chance for rebirth. Another mythological example is the eating of raw flesh in the cult worship of Dionysus, a purification ritual based on the story of Zagreus, who was dismembered and eaten by the Titans, all save for his heart, which was used for his rebirth. There's a lot of cannibalism in Greek myth, and I'm sure most people are familiar with the tale of Kronos, who is perhaps most known for devouring his children, Zeus having been the only one who escaped this fate. When Zeus grows up, he gives Kronos an emetic, which forces him to regurgitate those he had devoured. Devouring is an important word to use here because it implies violence and that nothing is left over from the occurrence. What I'm defining as mythical devouring consists of the following. 1. The eating is framed as important. 2. The food has a powerful, sometimes magical effect when ingested. And 3. It provides symbolism for the hero on their journey and/or notes a significant change for them. When one of these things happens, it might just be eating, or it's an important moment, but the food is an afterthought. An important side note here, to me, this is why the egg stuff in season 2 of The Mandalorian made a lot of people particularly angry. The act of swallowing something that has the potential to be life, eggs that a mother is trying to save, is a very violent act, and it seemingly had no actual effect on Grogu. The eggs themselves had more meaning provided than the act of eating them. And this is really important because mythical devouring is essentially devouring a piece of another, devouring a part of the universe so that the hero can become more powerful or wise. If, say, the eggs had some sort of magical effect on Grogu and didn't have a sentient mother, then that would have been a mythical devouring. But because the mother viewed each of these as her children, it came across as a lazy and disturbing joke. I find it fascinating that even with the West's history being so influenced by Christian thought, we don't see a lot of depictions of eating in the same way it is done so freely in Eastern media. What I mean by that is, take the receiving of the Eucharist, for example. The act is most generally the eating of the flesh and blood of the Christian Savior. It is a ritual that is so common that concerns of the coronavirus in March of 2020 led to a significant spike in sales for so-called rip and sip communion cups, which contain the wafer and juice in one smart little package. From a Campbellian point of view, all rituals are evoking the cycle of life and death, and specifically this ritual is taking in the God into yourself, essentially taking some of the power of the universe. This is mythical devouring, and yet it doesn't really show up in our modern media. Not in this way and not with this meaning. Another story in Christian mythology that evokes an idea of mythical devouring is the eating of the apple in the story of Adam and Eve. Unlike Eucharist symbology, we tend to see many reflections and retellings of this story. This is likely due to the exploration of sin and the struggle with temptation that is so prevalent in folklore and heroic tales. These depictions are not of mythical devouring, though. Rather, they are symbolic of the hero's failure and inability to resist such a temptation, which is funny because the story about Eve eating the forbidden fruit contains one very important detail. The food gave her wisdom. But the framing of this story has made it mean something different than what it could have in perhaps a non-patriarchal system. Also of note is the story of Jonah and the big fish. It's a very straightforward tale regarding being devoured and given the chance to be reborn again, death and rebirth. Quentin Tarantino often uses food to illustrate power dynamics between characters. If you watched a Tarantino film, you probably remember the food. But still, it's not mythically significant. The eating of a burger tells us a lot about the character and about the impending threat, but Tarantino doesn't use food as a signifier in the hero's story. The food does not have an effect, it is rather a framing device of sorts. Other examples in the West tend to lean more towards signifying corruption. Gollum's corrupt transformation is symbolized in his eating of the raw fish. Voldemort slaughters an innocent magical creature and ingests its blood in order to stay alive. The witches in Stardust must swallow the heart of a star in order to maintain their youth. It's insinuated that Sylar, the villain in Heroes, eats the brains of other heroes in order to obtain their powers, but this is dismissed later when he is on his redemptive arc. It goes to show you that devouring something raw, something alive, is seen as bad. It's something that villains do. In Attack on Titan, a show about devour or be devoured, it's revealed that you must devour one of the original 9 when they are still alive in order to obtain their power. This is seen as morally ambiguous on the show, but it's definitely an instance of mythical devouring, especially since the consuming of another's flesh is so literal here. It's also in direct contrast to the mindless zombie devouring that occurs so gratuitously in the rest of the show. It's even explained that the regular Titans that are not sentient don't actually have to eat to stay alive. But if they eat one of the 9, they essentially become a god, earning back their humanity and taking the memories of this other human. A less grotesque example is with Miyazaki films. A lot of people talk about Miyazaki food being so beautiful and tasty looking, but there are some storytelling choices involving food and eating that are great examples of mythical devouring. When Ponyo tastes Sosuke's blood, she starts to turn human. But remember ham?
It's ham! Careful, it's hot!
Ponyo's love of ham signifies her humanity, and every time she eats it, it shows her growing desire to stay human. In Spirited Away, Haku gives Chihiro a red berry to eat so that she won't disappear. This is in direct contrast to Chihiro's parents, gorging themselves and turning into pigs. Both are mythical devourings related to Chihiro's journey. There's actually a lot of devouring and regurgitating in Spirited Away. No-Face gorging himself is bad. It makes him bigger, nastier, and more monstrous. Chihiro plays Zeus here, giving No-Face an emetic, causing him to regurgitate all that he had devoured. Chihiro also plays Zeus when she force feeds the other half of the emetic to Haku, causing him to regurgitate the slug that was making him crazy. This emetic that was given to her by the river spirit, while also magical, is symbolic of Chihiro's learned selflessness. She earned it for helping the river spirit when others wouldn't, and she symbolically passes this lesson along to No-Face through feeding it to him. Later, when at Zeniba's, No-Face quietly eats a piece of cake, signifying his growth and newfound happiness. There's so much mythical devouring in anime, as it typically aligns with the power-up food trope and cannibalism superpower trope. But I must get on to the main topic, which is Beastars. At the beginning of this series, there's a mystery presented, where it is suspected that a carnivore has devoured an herbivore. Much of the first season wrestles with questions on morality and whether carnivores can go against their nature for all of their lives. Much of the show comes to rather horrific and nihilistic conclusions. Carnivores cannot go against their nature. They'll always be a threat to herbivores. Herbivores and carnivores cannot be friends. Legoshi knows this, but he's determined to fight against it anyway. Not because he thinks he's special, but because he refuses to live a life as a monster who would hurt his friends. It's a commendable trait, and it leads him to basically becoming a sort of vigilante monk. His mentor teaches him to rehabilitate carnivores who have devoured herbivores rather than taking them to the police. But when it's revealed that Riz is the one who devoured Tim at the beginning of season 1, Legoshi realizes he needs more than just tofu to stand up to him. In preparing to fight Riz, Legoshi has a mythical devouring moment where he eats a moth larva and comes face to face with the soul of that moth. The power of that moth transfers to Legoshi, and even though he undoubtedly took this moth's life from it, Legoshi understands the seriousness of the act and vows to honor that life that he knowingly took. Let's talk about the contrast to Riz's devouring moment. When Riz comes face to face with Tim and chooses to give in to his carnivorous nature, it is a seemingly religious moment for him. And this is a very interesting choice from a storytelling perspective. Riz takes Tim's body into himself and refuses to look back on that moment as if it were something bad. He sees it as the ultimate bond between carnivore and herbivore.
How dare you speak for him now?
He's my best friend. You could never understand our special bond.
True? Why did you do what you did, Riz?
It's the only way to break the barrier between species!
It may actually remind someone of a religious ritual. This is horrific, of course. So how is it different from what Legoshi did? Riz doesn't care that he ended Tim's life, and he has no actual respect for Tim as a living being. And it's not clear that Riz has retained any of Tim's soul as Legoshi did with the moth.
I can't remember Tim's face or voice anymore, but I can remember his taste and smell like it was yesterday.
This is a mythical devouring of corruption, whereas this is a mythical devouring of enlightenment. So now these two are evenly matched, right? Well, no, the big twist is that in order to defeat Riz, Legoshi must actually eat meat, not just insects. After eating a piece of his friend, Legoshi is now imbued with enough power to defeat Riz, and Riz finally recognizes the difference between the two devourings.
Tim, thank you.
I believe that the lack of significant food in stories is not just due to technical obstacles in filming it. Otherwise, how do you explain why there's so much food in live-action Eastern television shows? No, I think it comes from the West's obsession with purity and the lack of intimacy in our storytelling. Eating is often shown to illustrate excess and gluttony, rather than intimacy and pleasure. There's a strange sensation one gets when eating something that sparks an emotional reaction, and those emotions often contain vulnerabilities. Marvel superheroes don't really eat, they just maintain themselves. Eating mostly signifies weakness or evilness in much of our mainstream media. It rarely provides emotional moments or moments of retrieving power or insight. There's a lack of understanding that being vulnerable can be a step towards becoming more powerful, and being emotional can expel the things that are keeping you from moving forward.
야, 아이스크림 이렇게 많이 남기면 어떻게 해? 빨리 먹어 또.
Experiencing a mythical devouring in our stories can allow us to experience it within ourselves, allowing us to imagine ourselves being devoured so that we can be born again, or to imagine being the devourer so that we can hold a piece of another in that most intimate place. I know it's weird and a little creepy, but all myths are, at their core, crude and representative of the most basic human instincts.